2, 3, go.
The history of the European Union is one marked by political expansion, whether that be of member states, issues reserved for consideration by the European Parliament, or positive global influence on the international relations stage. However, contrary to the popular misconception which often exists in the UK, EU membership requires a lot more than simple bureaucratic form filling. The 1990s saw two crucial pieces of decision making regarding how member states are expected to join. The first is what is now described as the Copenhagen criteria, which are three crucial sort of base tests to see a prospective member state's compatibility with the EU. They were defined as a willingness to accept the broader objectives of a political, economic, and monetary union, at least a minimum level of commitment to the market mechanism and the principles of an economically free society, and evidence of a robust set of democratic institutions designed to promote and uphold democracy. The second was the much celebrated Maastricht Treaty, which set out a series of economic convergence criteria in order to encourage the levels of economic stability required to adopt the euro as a common currency. This included a range of measures, including debt to GDP ratios, yearly budget deficit limits, and general macroeconomic best practice. Though the convergence criteria were meant to be treated as hard and fast rules in order to preserve the stability of the euro, in practice they have often been treated more as guidelines than primary legislation. Indeed, the legitimacy of the Maastricht rules was significantly undermined by German breakages in the early 2000s. Now, you might be wondering why I've made allusion to these two particular bits of information. And the reason why is because I want to understand the principles on which membership is obtained. And the reason why I wanted to flag those is to understand that those principles shouldn't suddenly cease to exist the moment a member state is admitted. Indeed, my argument today, simply put, is that these measures of state integrity and robustness are for life, not just for the period of admission. Earlier in the year, former ALDE president Guy Verhofstadt remarked that the EU has a Hungary problem. This was ostensibly the result of Hungary blocking criticism of the Chinese state through joint statement, but reservations around the Hungarian political order run much deeper than simple sinophilia. Under Viktor Orban, the country is increasingly transformed into what can be described as a competitive, authoritarian state, one where democratic institutions nominally exist, but are captured by a narrow and increasingly aggressive elite. The solution, on face value, seems incredibly simple. Indeed, just this past week, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte stated what many of us on this call already know, that Hungary, and I quote directly, has no business being in the European Union anymore. This was made in specific reference to Hungarian laws around paedophilia, which made clear that there was a relationship between that act, which is criminal, and the act of being an LGBTQ person resident within Hungary. And this has created a great degree of tension. A number of solutions have been proposed, a number of which would require very wide-scale reforms of how the European Union operates. Verhofstadt himself would prefer a system which removes the requirement for unanimity in certain areas of decision-making. I suggest that the reality is much simpler than that Hungary has proven time and time again on a range of political and, I wish to emphasize, economic areas where it is simply incompatible with the direction of travel for the European Union. And for that reason, I'm suggesting that Hungary should, at the very least, see their membership of the European Union suspended, pending further improvements in the situation, or alternatively, a concerted effort made to reconsider its position within the bloc entirely. Now, some might ask, well, what is the reason for treating Orban's Hungary differently to Andrzej Duda's Poland? And for me, it boils down to two simple matters. The first is to understand the difference between authoritarian conservatism and the sort of totalitarian tendency that we see in Hungary. When the LGBTQ-free zones were announced within Poland, it resulted in the amassing of huge protests up and down the country. We've seen similar protests around issues of abortion in Poland. And we can see that there is at least the healthy core of a democracy, even if it is a populist party which is currently handling the sort of strings of power. Hungary, by contrast, has chosen time and time again to ignore the European Union as and when it is convenient. Civic society in Hungary is massively restricted. It has taken 4 years for preliminary legislation to be proposed in Hungary, which removes the requirement for any NGO which receives more than 20,000 euros of international funding to be classified as a foreign agent. Really, this is the sort of behavior that we would more associate with Putin's Russia than of a member of the European community. I understand that there are many individuals who are unnerved by the need to take this radical step forward. After all, it suggests that the decision to make Hungary a member in the first place was ultimately a failure. But it is important to make clear here, the European Union, firstly and foremostly, relies on value consensus. Where that value consensus no longer exists and where that value consensus is muddied, the European Union is significantly impoverished for it. And so the suggestion is simple. In the same way that member states can join, and member states can, in the case of the UK, exercise their right to leave, we must also have the ability to provide the strongest possible sanctions on states that no longer share that agenda and who have chosen demagoguery and alliances with the likes of China and Russia and have indicated no near-term desire to respect human rights. And that's the end of the first speech.